nothing. According to reports, on February 4, 2011, a day after Detective McBride and her team began to follow up on leads that pulled them away from Deshaun, that's when Detective Odom claimed that Mr. Ross voluntarily came to the Leon County Sheriff's Office and gave incriminating statements about Deshaun. Mr. Odom, who is being referred to in police reports, court documents, and in other court testimonies as Detective Odom, was never deposed. When Mr. Odom took to the witness stand, State Prosecutor Jack Campbell never addressed him as Detective Odom. Mr. Odom never states that he is, or nor was he ever, a Leon County Sheriff's detective. Mr. Odom states that he's been associated with the Leon County Sheriff's Office and that he had a lot of volunteer hours with the Leon County Sheriff's Office. And when Mr. Odom states that he became a detective with the Violent Crimes Unit, he says it in a manner as if a friend letting a friend assume a position just because that friend is hanging around the office all the time. Mr. Odom having nothing else to do with his time does not qualify him to be a detective. If Leon County Sheriff Larry Campbell wanted Mr. Odom to be an official Leon County Sheriff's detective, then surely Mr. Odom had the time and the financial means to attempt to go that route. Now, as far as Mr. Odom's ability to pass the psychological portion of the exam, now I highly doubt that have been possible, and I don't believe that I stand alone on that statement either. I'm going to show you a copy of a Miranda waiver form dated February 4, 2011, signed by Mr. Ross and witnessed only by Detective Odom. At first, I thought it to be strange that no other law enforcement officer had witnessed the Miranda waiver form. Like Mr. Ross's previous Miranda waiver form was witnessed by Detective McBride and Detective Farkas. But then, since Mr. Odom was not a detective, then it only made sense. Why would another law enforcement officer sign a fraudulent document? Mr. Odom can lie and not be fired for lying. Anyway, here's a copy of the Miranda waiver form dated February 4, 2011, signed by Mr. Ross and witnessed only by Detective Odom. Please look. Now please listen to a portion of Detective Odom's trial testimony. Please listen.
Good morning. Could you introduce yourself to the jury, please, sir?
Good morning. My name is Don Odom.
Okay. And what do you do for a living now?
I'm a business consultant and a church ministry consultant and also a private investigator.
Okay. What was earlier in life have you gone, or through your life, have you gone through several forms of business?
Oh, certainly.
Okay. Did you also become a reserve deputy?
I was associated with Leon County Sheriff's Office for a little over 12 years.
Who work as reserve officers doing various capacities, not being on the full-time payroll.
That's correct.
Full-time, did you get yourself to a position with your day job where you were able to dedicate a lot more hours during the recession to cop work, police work?
Yes, I had sold my business and became I was always volunteering there, had thousands of hours, had a car assigned to me, so I've always worked there for many years. And the last 2 years, after I sold my business, and they'd asked me if I wanted to come and be one of their homicide detectives because I was quite involved with investigative work with them.
Okay. And is this, did he take you to this Family Dollar and specifically these dumpsters that's on this picture?
After on their return from...
Once again, not going to what he told you, sir.
Okay.
Did
Yes,
Mr. Ross take you to that?
Yes, we did.
Okay.
Even if Mr. Odom was a reserve deputy, according to the Reserve Deputies Manual, volunteer staff members are not allowed to perform or hold detective positions. See, that's why Sergeant Pearson lied about having found the female victim's cell phone, because Mr. Odom was performing duties outside of the scope of a volunteer. Mr. Odom was not supposed to be assigned as lead detective, nor was Mr. Odom supposed to be participating in the search of the crime scene, which he was performing the duties of a crime scenes detective. I strongly believe that any government document, including those of the Leon County Sheriff's Office, and any document filed with the Leon County Clerk of Courts identifying Mr. Odom as Leon County Sheriff Detective Don Odom is a document containing fraudulent information. Leon County Sheriff Larry Campbell and his son, State Prosecutor Jack Campbell, along with State Attorney Willie Meggs, deliberately misled county judges, circuit judges, and the Leon County Clerk of Courts, as well as the public, especially the citizens of Tallahassee, by filing documents that contain fraudulent information, which is hands down a total breach of public trust. During Deshaun's trial, Circuit Judge Jackie Fulford allowed the jury to hear testimony identifying Mr. Odom as Detective Don Odom, knowing that Mr. Odom was not a Leon County Sheriff's detective. Deshaun's regional counsel, Darren Shippey, did not cross-examine Mr. Odom at all. Circuit Judge Fulford knowingly allowed the jury to be duped. Since State Prosecutor Jack Campbell's key witness in the double murder case, Mr. Ross, had never been deposed, it wasn't until Mr. Ross took the witness stand as to the first time that Deshaun and I heard from Mr. Ross since Deshaun was charged with the murders. Mr. Ross wasn't 20 minutes into his testimony on direct examination as to when Mr. Ross's own words proved him to not be a credible witness. Please listen to this first portion of Mr. Ross's trial testimony, starting out with State Prosecutor Jack Campbell on direct examination and with Deshaun's attorney, Regional Counsel Darren Shippey, intervening. Please listen.
Did you have an opportunity, starting then, did you and Detective Odom go on a ride?
Yes, we did.
May I approach, Your Honor?
You may.
Do you remember going on a ride with the detective, and I think one of the other detectives was taking pictures of where you took them?
Yes, sir.
Those pictures take pictures in the daylight of the place you went with Deshaun that night?
Yes, sir.
I'd introduce states R 1 through 17 into evidence.
Any objection?
Would Your Honor allow me to at least conduct a voir dire with respect to these matters?
You may.
Thank you. I have the photograph.
You may.
Good afternoon, Mr. Ross.
Good afternoon, sir.
You've had a chance to look at these photographs, which are identified as State's Exhibit R 1 through 17. Is that correct?
Yes, sir.
Are you able to tell us what day you and Detective Odom and anybody else may have gone on this ride to which you've testified that led to these photographs?
I do not recall, sir.
And when you took the ride, who was driving?
I do not recall who was driving.
Where were you seated?
I was seated inside the back of a cop's car.
And when you took this ride with Detective Odom and the other person, not asking for details, but what in essence were you explaining to them that resulted in photographs being taken?
I was explaining the events that took place the night of which they said was the murder.
Pardon me? I didn't hear you. I'm sorry.
I was explaining the events that took place in the locations that we were of the night that they said the murder had happened.
Did you hear how Mr. Ross says the night that they said the murders had happened? That makes no sense. According to Detective Odom's probable cause report, Mr. Ross was very involved in Deshaun's events before and after the murders. Supposedly, Mr. Ross borrowed his girlfriend's car and drove Deshaun around. So now, why would Mr. Ross say the night that they said that the murders had happened? Mr. Ross's girlfriend was not deposed, nor was she called to testify. Mr. Ross's statement, the night that they said that the murders happened, only shows that Mr. Ross was willing to go along with whatever was presented to him to say in order to incriminate Deshaun. In the second portion, you'll hear an example of how State Prosecutor Jack Campbell guides Mr. Ross through his testimony to keep their inside story straight. Please listen.
Now, do you remember what kind of jacket he had on?
The
only thing I can really tell you was a black hoodie. That was it.
Okay. Do you know whether it had a zipper down the middle or?
No, sir. I don't recall.
Okay. Did it have a pocket where it could have his hand in it? Do you remember that? His hand being in his pocket?
Yes, sir.
Did you know what he had in that pocket?
At the time, no, sir.
When he got back in, what did he ask you to do?
What did he ask me to do when he got back in? When he got back in, he told me to go to the honestly right now, sir, I can't really recall that right there.
Okay. Did he tell you to drive somewhere else?
Yes, sir.
Okay. Did he tell you to turn around by a billboard and maybe that food dollar? Do you remember the Family Dollar going to that parking lot at some point?
Yes, sir.
And did he give you directions of where to go next?
Yes, sir.
Where did y'all end up?
We end up parked backwards inside a driveway on, is it Highway 20?
Okay.
State Prosecutor Jack Campbell guiding Mr. Ross through his testimony while Regional Counsel Darren Shippey sat idly. I didn't expect much from Deshaun's Regional Counsel Darren Shippey. I'd offered to pay for a private investigator to assist on the case, but Mr. Shippey never got back to me. Mr. Shippey was playing the same games as Mr. Cummings, but he was just up a level. Mr. Shippey had filed a subpoena with the fictitious name of a former Leon County Sheriff's deputy on it, and the subpoena was accepted by the Leon County Sheriff's Office. The deputy had parted ways with the Leon County Sheriff's Office years ago, which made no sense for Mr. Shippey to have served the subpoena to the Leon County Sheriff's Office. The former deputy would have probably testified favorably on Deshaun's behalf. When I called Mr. Shippey out on the fictitious name, Mr. Shippey became angry and stopped accepting my letters. Deshaun's trial was disgraceful. When a group of judicial officials lie in order to get a child convicted and leave a cold-blooded murderer out in the community, that group of officials are menaces to society. When you have governing agencies like Florida Governor Rick Scott, Attorney General Pam Bondi, the Florida Department of Law Enforcement, the local Federal Bureau of Investigation, the Florida Bar, and the Judicial Qualifications Commission not investigating the judicial officials, that's terrible. President Obama, please, these people need to be immediately removed from their positions while being investigated for operating under color of law. I am fearful for my son's safety. This year, over the 4th of July weekend alone, there were 3 deaths in Florida prisons. Every parent in America should be outraged because my son could have been their child. We need you to help us protect our children from these predators. Thank you, and may God bless you.